If you're hitting the goals, great. If you're not hitting the goals, why? Because that's no different than the way that you support with your internal team. Sometimes you're going to crush it and sometimes you're not going to crush it. But if you know why you're not crushing it and working together, then that's what will maintain your actual results.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am your host as well as your sponsor, all the things. I am Daniel Weiner. You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for virtually any marketing or technology need, because finding great agencies is a giant pain in the ass. I am super excited to be joined today by Tara Robertson, who is CMO of Bitly. Tara, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Excited to be here.
This is round two. We just did one question and had a technical difficulty. So hopefully we can make it through this entire thing without having that happen again.
Always a fun way to start the day.
Yeah, but we'll dive right back in. What is an unpopular opinion or a hot take of sorts that you have in the marketing world?
Hot take. I do not believe that marketing is about generating demand. I believe instead that it's about generating value. And the more value you can bring and understand your customers, the more demand you will then in turn drive. And so if you're going after it with just getting leads and trying to drive revenue without actually paying attention to who you're bringing in the door, you're not going to grow. And so that's a big hot take that I like to bring first and foremost front and center.
I have a hot take question then from that hot take. Who dictates what is valuable?
Ooh, what a great question. I mean, truly your customers, whoever it is that you're building your product, your service, whatever it is you do for. And so spending time with them and then partnering with, for us, it's our product team and looking at overall innovation to make sure that whatever we're building will in turn create the value that, our customers are coming in to look for. So I think it starts with your users.
That makes total sense, and that's a totally fair answer. We're going to talk about the LinkedIn stuff since that's how we got connected. I find there's a narrative online about you must provide value. And I think if you get so caught up on what is valuable, you'll never post or do some of these things, because if you create something and you're it's not valuable enough, but who gets to decide that? So I was just curious of your answer in that regard.
Yeah, and I think, Daniel, it's really looking at the KPIs, right? If it's creating content, like you just mentioned, are you getting reads? Are people spending time on the page? Are people actually consuming that content, engaging with the content, sharing it on social? Then how you're doing. If it's, not really driving any traction, then, how do you decide whether or not it's value? It's just based on your numbers.
Sure. You started your career agency side, which is the exact experience we love on this podcast. Then you made your jump to brand side. You've been at some pretty notable brands, Hotjar, Sprout Social, Teamwork, and now Bitly. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are now and kind of what's the biggest change you've seen in consumer behavior in the last few years?
Sure. And I truly believe a big part of what's brought my change over the course of my career and being able to go on and be very lucky to work with some really incredible brand is that experience in starting out on the agency side. As I'm sure most people know, if you're coming from agency or if you've worked in agency, it's a completely different world. You wear all the hats, all the different hats, and going from days where you're running marketing to days where you're the technical support, trying to figure out how to get the computers working. And so in my agency days, I learned how to really grow and scale and build out a business and, made the shift to moving in-house. And, certainly I think both of them have got incredible pros to them. There's certainly differences between the two of them. And where I see consumer behavior shifting as a whole, outside of, what's happening within agencies, what's happening within in-house teams, is really just how we consume information as people or as humans. It used to be when I first started out my career, there was a big push with inbound marketing and everyone was all focused on trying to drive more social engagement, bringing people in with great content. You get really great at SEO and you get really great at being found. And now it really is to that first point that we talked about. How do you find value and how do you make sure that whatever it is that you are building is going to capture the right kind of demand? And so as a marketer, we really can't afford to not pay attention to the fact that people have more choice than ever in what they want to consume and how they want to interact and how they want to buy. And we've got to pay attention to customer growth. We have to pay attention to communities and make sure that you are providing value in order to make yourself stand out.
No, that's awesome. That's a good segue into the next question. You mentioned we have more, buying choices now than ever. We're inundated with information all day. What's your advice to other CMOs out there, especially in this current, weird pre-recession, somewhat in recession type world where discretionary spending may be low? What do you tell another CMO who's figuring out how to stand out or what to do with budget and stuff like that?
Sure. I think it really does depend on stage and where you're at in your business and what your business actually does, because our goals in general in marketing can be very, very different, whether you're a startup or a public company or kind of in that growth to scale up stage. And so the first piece of advice is know your KPIs, know what you're responsible for driving as a whole, and then balance that against how you are able to make more with less. As you mentioned, right now, it's a very, very cautious time for marketers because we want to spend, but we also want to make sure that we're being more efficient than we ever have. And so paying really close attention to what are the areas that foundationally you want to spend your budget on, that you have to spend your budget on, like paid acquisition. And then what are the things worth taking bets? And probably one of the most important pieces of advice is this is not the time to pull back on taking risks. We still have to do it. Actually, if anything, we have to do it more so than in the past because just doing the foundational work, it's just not enough because you are working on trying to stand out and you are working on trying to be innovative and different from your competitors and to create very compelling content and ways to humanize your brand. And so it's really balancing the foundational stuff that you need to do, but also not being afraid to take some risks and take some big swings out there and know in partnership with the rest of your executive team, how much you're willing to invest. You can do a lot with very little, but you definitely can't afford to not take those risks.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. This is episode, 28 once it airs, and I ask pretty similar questions and get such differing things. And I think it comes back a lot to like your executive team as well. The last couple we talked about had Brian Law, who's the CMO of ZoomInfo, and Jamie Walker, who's EVP of marketing at Key Factor. And we talked about in times like this, it's so dependent on the leadership team when taking those big risks, because right now is like the time where everything, you use the word efficiency, people want everything tracked more than ever and attribution and all of that stuff. And if you just, stop the creativity and like taking some of those risks, like when we come out, undoubtedly, I presume on the other side of whatever this is, like you're worse off for it than if you did take some of those swings. But it's also that delicate balance, right? Like if you take a big swing and miss, having a leadership team that doesn't freak out and say like, what's going on? Why did we do that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that too. I think it's really not just about what you're doing in marketing, but what you're doing with the rest of your executive team. And so there's a whole separate topic and podcast that can go into how you work through communicating your strategy, communicating your plan, getting buy-in before you actually push those risks ahead. But I think that piece is necessary because you don't want to take a risk, like you mentioned, and take a big swing and miss and then not get the support on, this is something we're doing together. So anything we work with in our marketing team as a whole is in partnership with the support of the rest of the executive team.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about agencies some. I had originally reached out based on a LinkedIn post that you had made regarding agencies and finding good partners and stuff like that, which we'll get into in a sec. But what's your overall opinion on agencies? They get I work with them predominantly, and they get a bad rep. Overall, everybody's got a bad agency experience. How does Bitly think about agencies and vendors fitting into their ecosystem?
Big fan of agencies, big fan of whether it's a agency, whether it's a smaller consultant that works, as, a fractional leader or support. I would say we're very pro in working with the right agencies and the right fractional leaders to come in and consult in the areas that we need to. What's interesting is I think the way that I think about this is we're very lucky to be in a position as a product right now that we're still growing, and the challenges that we have, are lucky challenges to have in the economy right now. And so, and part of that comes with rapid growth and rapid innovation is that you have a need to move quickly. And even though we're in a space right now where we feel confident in our growth and, everything is moving in the right direction, you can't ignore what's happening in the market and what's actually happening with our economy. And no one really fully knows what the next few months to the next year is really going to look like. And so something I think that has served us very well is that we are not a grow at all costs, hire at all costs business, but we see that there is a huge opportunity to invest in bringing in experts, external agencies or consultants that can come in and help us fill the gap so we can maintain that growth, but also maintain the stability of how we're growing within a business without bringing on too many people all at once. And so we tend to actually think agency or consultant first, one for speed and time to value, but then also the stability in making sure we're managing our budgets efficiently with how we're thinking about headcount. And I think there's a couple really important standout moments of what makes an agency successful in that model or what makes a consultant successful in that model. And the way that we actually partner with all of our agencies is about bringing them in and treating them as if they are a part of the team, not necessarily somebody that's just supporting a part of the function or a part of the business. And that's serving us really well. And it's something that I've actually done prior to even coming with Bitly. There's a few agencies that I'll always continue to work with because of the way they work and the results that I know they can bring. And I see so much value in bringing in an agency that's trusted that you're going to get results within 1 month, within 2 months, versus you bring on a full-time hire and it takes 6 months for somebody to get fully up and running, let alone the actual hiring process and getting someone in the door.
Pro agency, we love to hear it. Folks that I speak to, which are mostly CMOs, largely VPs of marketing as well, with your title though, especially, are getting hit up every 12 seconds. LinkedIn, Slack communities, everything being sold by agencies and vendors. Is that the case for you as well?
Oh my gosh, I can't even keep up with LinkedIn. At this point, I've given up. And
well,
I feel
I'm so
bad about
flattered
it.
then that you my message to come on stood out then.
I mean, and it did. And I think part of it is the personalization that comes into the messaging. And to your point, I can't keep up with LinkedIn because it is so many messages and candidly, so many messages that are just, you can tell that someone's just taking the same message and spamming it across every CMO that they're trying to reach out to. And so if I see personalization come in, I'll often try to respond back to that because someone's taking the time and doing their research and connecting with you on a personal level. But what comes in between all of that is impossible to actually keep up with.
I was once one of those monsters many, many years ago sending, well, truthfully, I think everybody had to at some point in their life to eventually send good messages. But yeah, I mean, even now, like I'll connect with somebody and we'll be communicating. I'll scroll back to like 2015 and see that I sent a ridiculous, like cold message that makes me want to cringe that I'm like apologizing for almost a decade later. But yeah, is there anything when you're not in buying mode, though, that somebody can say or do to get your attention? I find generally like the answer is no, truthfully, for most of the folks that I chat with, that unless they're looking, like they just don't have the time to do that.
Honestly, for me, often no to that same point. And part of it is because a big part of what we're balancing right now, and we just talked about this, is budgets, it is prioritization, and it is a level of focus that's critical. And I would say that regardless of what's happening in the market right now, as a growing marketing organization, as a growing software business, there's a lot of things going on and a lot of things that we constantly need to be doing. And as a result, we have to maintain focus. My days are constantly context switching, jumping from call to call, reviewing different strategies, trying to make sure that we keep up on it. The last thing I have time for is a sales call for something we're not actively looking for. And so often we're not actually willing to jump on a call right away and get a demo and see how this one thing is going to bring us 10x the leads than we're expecting. However, I will say there are components in where something will get on my radar, especially from a personalization perspective. And maybe it's not right now, but if we go down the habit of wanting to review a software of this kind or a service of this kind, then maybe it's something that we'll start to consider. And so the things that probably make me put that on the radar is one, personalization, and two, actually understanding the overall impact. And I'll often send that along to someone else on my team to say, hey, this might be something worth evaluating over time, but it's often not that first call. I will give a disclaimer. I do have some colleagues that I know in the space that often, they'll use a tactic of, hey, if you donate to a certain charity, a certain amount of money, send me the receipt, then I will hop on a call with you to kind of build up some of the philanthropy and goals that they have overall as a business and a growing leader. And so that is something I know that works for some people. And if it's something I'm looking for, like maybe, but typically not a tactic I run.
Yeah, I feel I'm torn on that because overall it's good. Like giving to charity and philanthropy is great, but like, does that vendor have any chance? I go back and forth on my thoughts on that. I know people who run that as well. It's interesting, to your point, like the message about 10xing results and stuff like that, we've grown so cynical that like, say somebody could do that, which most of those are BS, I would presume. But even if they could, there's so much bad that even the good outreach gets lumped in with the bad.
Totally.
I talk about that all the time, like don't get lumped in. If your message has anything like that, I would generally defer to like, I don't know what results we're going to get to. We're going to make your life easier and I'm a normal human being to chat with. Like, I think people lean in over-index too much on that stuff. I don't know if you follow Will Allred, who runs Lavender on LinkedIn at all, who has all the data around this stuff of what people say, and it's just wild to see. There's still so much bad. There's still so much bad practice. It's wild, but there's so much of it. I don't think you can stand out. Like even the good just gets lumped in with the crap.
Yeah, I will say there was one that stood out to me recently where it was someone of a competitor of a company that I used to work with. And they're like, look, I know you're using the software. You used to work there. I got a shot in the dark. That's not going to happen. But just in case, I'd love to talk to you. And it was very personal and in a way that kind of made me laugh in general. Am I going to get on the phone? Probably not, just because, they were right in the challenge that they were putting out there. But I appreciate that shot.
Fair.
And to your point, every message I get is something along the lines of, hey, would you like to increase the traffic to your website or 10 extra leads? I'm like, of course I would. Of course I want to increase those things, but certainly not from an outreach email of someone coming in and telling me this is the time I need to work with them because they've got the magic bullet that's going to help us get there.
My favorite ones are, Daniel, could you handle another like 20 clients next month if we sent them to you? So those are always good. When you are in buying mode and say you're looking for agencies and evaluating them, how can an agency stand out at that point? Or like, what are you looking for from an agency or vendor? Usually I find like the biggest things that I'm chatting about are category experience versus like service experience. Do you want somebody who has worked with your competitors or who is experts at this actual thing that you need done or somewhere in between?
For me, it comes down to two things. One is specialization. And so often we're looking for agencies or somebody to come in to help support an area of the business. It is often very specific to a use case that we need to drive. And then the second thing is I would couple that with referrals. And so I would say in general, my network is amazing. And I've learned so much from all of the people I have across my network. And I'm a part of a lot of different CMO huddles or CMO networks as well, where we'll just go in and ask questions for referrals because often you don't want to go down the path of a completely cold research because you don't know. And we've all had our wins and we've all had our horror stories of where we've worked with different kinds of agencies and the ones that stand out versus the ones that, have really fallen down. And often when I have a strong referral coming from someone that I trust, that I know, that I've partnered with throughout the course of our careers together, then I'm going to trust that agency that much more.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up communities. I think they're wonderful for you as CMO. I think they're terrifying for agencies. I hear so many, I'm in, a ton of communities as well, where I'll see somebody ask if anybody has heard about X agency, and a CMO or a VP will chime in like, oh, I had a horrific experience with them. Don't work with them. And I think it's dangerous a little bit on that front. Nobody asks for context. Luckily, I've never seen any of my agencies get torn apart online, or I don't know what I would do, maybe jump in at their defense. But I think that's the scary proposition for agencies on that side, because rightly so, even if you don't want context, you're probably weary of that agency. There's a million other agencies for me to chat with, and you won't give them the time of day. So I think it's a unique time for agencies in terms of communities of now more than ever doing what is right from a customer service perspective. And, if something does go awry, doing everything in your power to save face or come out at least not terrible on the other side.
Yeah. And that's such a strong point. And I was thinking about that while you were saying that about kind of the terrifying piece of working within communities. I have had agencies that I've worked with that it just hasn't gone well. But to your point, their customer service was beyond amazing. And they went out of their way to try to say, how do we make this right? And whether or not it didn't work out, I'm less likely to then say, ooh, don't work with that agency, because just because it wasn't right for us doesn't mean it wouldn't be for someone else. And in the same way I think about our people, and this is where I partner in the way we think about full-time employees as the agencies that we work with. If someone's willing to lean in and say, hey, let's work together here, we're a team, then that means all the difference between agencies that I've worked with that I wouldn't recommend. And part of the reason is, maybe they got defensive, maybe things didn't end on the best possible way, or they didn't care about the customer experience. And I do think that has to go two ways.
Yeah, absolutely. You alluded to it before of specialization when you're looking for an agency. I've seen a big shift a little bit prior to COVID, because I worked at a small agency, but especially since COVID, of quote unquote bigger name brands or brands in general moving towards smaller independent agencies that are specialized in like 1 to 2 things. Have you seen that as well? Is that more appealing to you than working with a big agency?
100%. And I would say in almost every case, the smaller agencies that I've worked with, the ones that are specialized, they're the ones that really embed themselves into the team and work as if they're a part of your team. Where in the larger agencies, depending on how big your wallet is and how big your budget is, it's how much they're going to give you when it comes to even the customer experience. And that's really not what we're looking for. We don't want to work with a large agency that's just going to, assign an account manager to us that's just clocking in and doesn't really care about the brand in the way that we do. And I think that is a huge component of when we decide, do we want an agency or in-house? The only way it works for us is when we are working with someone that would act the same way as an in-house team member. If we've got an agency coming in and we're just a fraction of what they do and they're not spending time trying to learn our brand and trying to learn, the different nuances between our competitive suite, then it really doesn't quite work out. And those are the ones we end up parting ways with. And unfortunately, my experience has been with the larger agencies that tends to be more the rule than it is the exception versus the other way around.
Yeah, small agencies, I'm super blunt about it. Small agencies care more because they have to care more. Bigger agencies, unless, again, your checkbook is enormous or, a specific portion of their revenue, they're not as incentivized, in my opinion, to do great or care as much because they don't have to, truthfully.
Right, exactly.
You want to do the positive agency experience or the negative agency experience first? I give everybody an option these days.
Oh, what do most people pick? That's a question.
I don't know, truthfully. I can't think of what everybody picks. I feel like most people pick the positive first.
I was going to go positive, so why don't we go negative then?
Okay.
Let's start with the negative and then we'll end with the positive.
Lay it on me. Give me a negative agency experience you've had, and in particular, what made it negative? I'm curious.
Yeah, I will give you 2 very different examples, one on the brand side and one on the acquisition side, just to, give a whole well-rounded experience of what we think about in marketing.
Double negative.
That's not really my MO, but I'll try my best. And so
if you don't, truthfully, once you're at your level, you have to have a negative agency experience. Like everything can't just go I think that's a big misnomer as well. I posted about it a little this morning, actually. People think hiring an agency we hired them, we made the decision, we're guaranteed stuff. You have to cultivate it and do a lot of stuff to make sure an agency is successful as well. It's on both sides. So
definitely. Okay. So on the brand side, we worked with an agency at a company that I was with that was coming in and helping support our brand campaign efforts. And to your point, it was a larger agency, didn't really have a lot of skin in the game, didn't really go in and do any customer research, any competitive research, and put together these brand campaign designs and creatives that just, 1, did not align to who we were, but 2, were just completely off the mark. And so that happens, especially with creative often, and you'll come back and give feedback and then hopefully go through a couple rounds.
Sure.
But it just kept getting worse to the point of where we were getting emails from the agency basically every single time we would try to come in and say hey, this is just off the mark. They would start charging us more and start to go down the rabbit hole of hey, this is scope creep. We need to spend more money. And the amount of money that we ended up spending with that agency for a campaign that we didn't even end up launching was just absolutely astronomical. And so that was one where we actually...
Can we get the number?
No, I mean, it's painful. It's painful. We'll just say it's hundreds of thousands. And so at the end of the day, we did get something that was out there and it did fine, but it wasn't actually impactful. And that experience was so bad that we decided to actually build the entire team in-house. And so that was an experience where we were like, no more. We are not outsourcing creative. We are not outsourcing brand. We need to have an in-house team to do this. And, that was the right decision for the business. But I think a lot of it was prompted by just continuous failure within that space. So I'd say that's on the brand side. Is my advice to agencies is if you are working in brand and creative, spend time with your customers, spend time getting to know the brand, and spend time getting to know the leaders within the business and what's going to resonate versus what isn't. A lot of what was falling down was that, the actual creative itself was so far off from what our brand had ever done that it didn't really align with who we were, both internally as well as externally. So that was on the brand side. Acquisition side, boy, do I have a lot of examples of what's gone wrong on the acquisition side. Probably my favorite, worst experience and least favorite, but favorite experience is
makes for a good story.
I will say I will never work with a paid agency again after this one. Ever. I have not gotten to the point to where my trust is back to the point of wanting to work with
I hate
acquisition.
to plug myself live, but if you get to a spot where you need one, I like to think I have some good partners, but I'm curious, since you've had such a negative experience, what you think. Truthfully, this is what makes me terrified. When people have had such negative experience, they're like, Danny, who you got for me? I'm like, I'm so scared. Like, my agencies aren't like magicians, like I'm terrified to hear what you think. So
I would say this is the, masterclass in what not to do. And so we really went down the rabbit hole of trying to find a really good paid agency. The person we had in-house moved on. We needed to move quick, saw an opportunity, went out, did a ton of scoping, a lot of different companies coming in and pitching to us. And the one that we actually went forward with had the best pitch, had a best experience. Everything looked like it was going to be phenomenal. Really good sales process. Seemed like a really good team. Should have known from the day once we signed the contract, the whole team changed. And so suddenly we weren't working with the people that we were working with during the actual process itself. We started to jump in and get into analytics and started to point out things that maybe were wrong in analytics and that needed to be fixed. We're like, well, that makes sense. Everyone's GA is never perfect. Let's go in and work together on fixing some of those things. But while we were doing it, they made a mistake in our Google Analytics while also bidding and ended up spending hundreds of thousands of dollars over our budget within the course of, a week or so. And we captured it, brought it back, and we're like, y'all made a big mistake. You need to fix this, and refused to actually take the fall on the actual mistake that they made, which we could point back to. Very quickly moved on from them. They blew through our budget within a very short period of time. And instead of, and I would say that this is the part that really irked me about this experience, they worked directly with my VP of acquisition. And when he came back and was kind of coming to him, certainly was working with me too. I'm like, this is what we want to say. This is how we want to approach this. As he continued to send them emails, they went around him and sent me a bunch of emails talking about, a bunch of concerning things that they had, and they needed to have a conversation with me only, which I will say as a CMO, don't do that. Please don't do that, because at the end of the day, the person that's signing your checks is the person that you're working with. I'm just here to serve and support my team. And so the fact that 1, I could see the mistake, 2, it was brought to my team, 3, they then tried to blame our VP, which we knew was not the case, by going around him and had all these defensive emails. It was just a hot mess across the board.
Unbelievable. It is wild, truthfully. I hear these things all the time and they never cease to amaze me. I'm curious, what did they say to not reimbursing you? What was the...
What was their
side? Just not.
It wasn't in their terms. Yeah. They tried a new bidding strategy. No big deal. They got a bunch of leads, but it was a bunch of garbage. And so they were looking at it as like, oh, we hit the numbers and then we succeeded with it. We spent the budget, but look at all this great result. We're like, none of that is actually going to convert. None of it will turn into revenue because it's garbage leads coming from areas that we would never bid on outside of our top countries. And so there was a strong lack of alignment. And I would say a big part of it came back to, again, they didn't really care. We knew that we were just one of their clients. And then 2, when it's pointed out, they just tried to play the blame game on what we said we were going to do. And your VP of acquisition sucks. which was not the case. He was wonderful.
You're making people's years with these mistakes between the brand, the hundreds of thousands, and this thing. These agencies are billing and not even having to do work. It's a great scenario for them, it sounds like.
Right, exactly.
Unbelievable. Do you think that not in that scenario, obviously, but do you think a negative situation can be salvaged, or once like the seed of doubt has been placed, it's hard to get back to a good spot?
I definitely think a negative situation can be salvaged. Using that example, like if they had reached out, and maybe it wasn't even by reaching out to the VP of acquisition, if they reached out to me and were like, hey, we messed up. We're so sorry. Here's what we're going to do to make this right. And we work together. And that wasn't even in saying, hey, we're going to eat all the cost, but this is what we think we can do. How do we work together? Let's get on a call and just see how we can salvage this. That is a very different experience than y'all are, your VP isn't doing their job and we need to talk to you about this not working out, because at the end of the day, no one wants to play the blame game. I will give a negative experience that turned into a positive one. As an example, I worked with an agency many years ago that came in to help support some of our efforts in conversion rate optimization, and they just could not get a win. No matter what, all the tests that we were running, we just couldn't get a win and we weren't getting to the result. And they actually reached out and said, hey, we recognize this isn't going the way that we thought it was. We're going to work for free until we can get you a win, because we feel like that's what's important in our relationship. And we're so confident that we're going to be able to continue to drive the right results forward. We actually did not continue working with them because at that point we had, made some shifts and some structural changes. But I would refer that agency still to this point, because that's an agency that, we were working with that never want to be in a position to where people are giving away free work. But if it's like, hey, just let us prove out to you that we can do this because we're recognizing things aren't going in the right direction. That was a strong example of moving in the other direction, but something that I will never forget and continue to refer them on, even though we didn't really get the results that we were looking for.
No, that's fair. I feel like I need a drink after those tales. Should we move on to positivity now?
You and me both, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Or should we just keep doing negative stories? These are the those are the more entertaining ones, I presume. Tell me anything positive, a positive agency experience you've had and what made it so positive.
Yeah, I guess I just ended on the negative with a positive one, and that was a really positive experience in working together. I will say there are some agencies that I would take with me everywhere. And I think that's how we initially got connected, because I made a post on LinkedIn just sharing that, because the positive experiences all come down to really two things for me. One is strong communication, that they are really good project managers, that they are really great communicators. And then two, embedding themselves within the team and showcasing results. And so often whenever there is a positive experience with different agencies, those agencies have taken the time from the beginning to get on the phone and say, okay, let's talk about our goals. What are we working on together? Let's talk about our research. What do we have access to that we can use in order to, work on the overall goals? If we don't have the research, we're going to need to do it. If I have an agency that comes in the door and says, I'm going to charge you $50,000 to do research because you don't have this and it's going to make your results that much better, I would much prefer to go in that direction than to say, hey, cut some corners and let's just execute some stuff, because then you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall. And
you're
so
going to get a bunch of messages offering to do research for $50,000 now in your LinkedIn inbox, just so you know. So
we are not accepting any $50,000 research projects right now. But
well, I'll cut that line out for you.
That sounds good. Thank you. So I'd say on the positive side, the things that really stand out are the agencies that we work with that embed themselves into the team. They ask a lot of insights. They know what your goals are, and that they're consistently coming back to them. If you're hitting the goals, great. If you're not hitting the goals, why? Because that's no different than the way that you support with your internal team. Sometimes you're going to crush it, and sometimes you're not going to crush it. But if you know why you're not crushing it and working together, then that's what will maintain your actual results. And so to make that tangible with some examples, one agency that we work with for conversion rate optimization is constantly running tests. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're inconclusive, but everything has a learning goal as a result. And something that they do, I think that stands out way beyond most other agencies that I've worked with is the one embedding themselves within the team, spending time getting to know all the different people. But being a really good strategic partner, reaching out and saying, hey, here's what we're seeing. Here's a roadmap that we're working on. And here's where we're prioritizing, and not being afraid to push back on the things that maybe aren't a priority or maybe aren't necessarily the thing that's going to drive the 10x growth that we talked about before.
Sure.
And so I think often coming back to your goal was to do X. Here's how we were able to deliver against that. Here's what we're working on next to continue. So it's really working as a partner. And that would be the same for really every agency we worked with, whether it's content optimization, whether it's, conversion, someday we have a paid acquisition team that we need again. It's really just kind of coming back to those roles and working as an in-house team member.
Yeah, you kind of furthered my belief of one of my, I guess it's a hot take at this point, that results are not what make an agency good or bad, in my opinion. To your point, like, you work with an agency where sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but the overall thing is proactivity and doing what they say they're going to do and presumably making your life easier and your job easier and stuff like that. You just cannot hit a home run every single at bat as an agency or in-house or anybody, truthfully.
No one can hit a home run every single time they try. If we knew how to do that, we would all be billionaires, in our yachts living the life. That's not the way that the world works. And so I think I completely agree with your hot take in that if you're working with somebody that comes back to your KPIs and showcases the why behind it, makes a substantial difference. The other thing I would say on the positive side for agencies that we've worked with that, really work well, they know you. They understand your brand. They understand your customers. They understand your competitors. They can speak to them. All of those negative experiences we've talked to prior to this section, none of them actually spent time going in and doing the research or could speak to who our top competitors were off the top of their hand. Every positive experience I've had with an agency, they've spent the time really understanding our customers, who our buyers are, and who our top competitors are, and can speak to that to the same level we would expect an in-house team member to do. That sets you completely against the pack. And I would say very few agencies actually do that to the level that, you really need in order to be able to have confidence that I don't need to hire in-house. I can work with this agency as an arm to our in-house team because they're just as bought in to the work that we're doing on the day-to-day.
Yeah, I can't remember which podcast. I think might have been the last one with Jamie, where we were talking about exactly that and how it was the people, truthfully. And, at one of the agencies that they work with, like, it's one person who is just so, ingrained with their team. And I can't remember her answer exactly, but I was like, what if they leave? And that's what I hear a lot. Like, there's 90,000 agencies in the US alone, or at least companies that identify as agencies. That could be like one person in a garage, I presume. But, at the end of the day, like, it's people and process. It sounds a lot of what I heard from you as well. You talked about project management, you talked about people who actually care and give a shit about your business and stuff like that. And I think I see so many agencies over-index for we can 10x your growth versus like actually humanizing what they're doing and making your life easier.
The number one pushback that I hear from other business colleagues or even people I've worked alongside on why not to work with an agency is, an agency is never going to be as embedded into the brand as an in-house team member. And that's where, when we talk about the positives, I've seen the other side of that. I've worked with agencies and I continue to work with agencies that are as embedded in your product and your brand as an in-house team member. And those are the ones that I'd refer anywhere. They're the ones I'd take anywhere, the ones I know that are in it because they truly do want to work on the results together and build your brand together, versus the ones that are coming in as a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. Another unpopular or hot take opinion of mine. I think more agencies than not, I don't know the percentage split, want to do that, like be a team member. And I think more marketers than not say that, but keep their agencies at arm's length to a certain degree and don't give them as much access as they would probably like oftentimes. And I don't really know why. I think a lot of people like hire agencies and then they beat them up. Like, that's the thing. They think they're doing that thing and they don't give them kind of like the keys to the city because they don't think they need to. Whereas like access and information and all that sort of stuff presumably makes everybody's life easier.
I've got total reactions to that. So on both sides, actually.
It'd be better if you just walked off. You're like, no way, Danny. I'm done with this interview.
I'm out. On both sides of that, I think that there's some truth and then some hard realities. And so having worked on the agency side, agency life is hard, no question. Like that is just a hard life with context switching that you're working on. That still exists actually on the in-house side also. Yeah. Your context switching is just a little bit different in what you're doing on the day-to-day. And what's fascinating is I think for me, having worked in an agency, I have a ton of empathy for agencies coming in because I've lived both of those worlds and completely understand that need to want to come in and showcase the results and then need to go to the next client and managing margins, which is a very different world than what you're working on within software. On the other side of that, as now an in-house CMO, I've actually had really interesting experiences where, we'll treat every single agency that comes in the door exactly the same. We want them to be embedded into the team. We want them to be working with us and bought into the brand. But at the same time, we often don't remember to say like, okay, new agency, here's the onboarding that a new team member will go through. Here's all the research that we have access to. And I think it's often the agencies we work with that aren't afraid to ask the questions, that aren't afraid to come in and have humility to a certain degree of like, hey, we're learning right now, help us learn, versus the agencies that come in and say, we're going to 10X, let's get going. We're going to get you results next month and start moving really quickly and then not ask for those same things. What I've seen is then those second agencies are the ones that tend to fall down and say, boy, I wish we had access to customer research. We really should be doing this. How do we get this into the process? And I'm like, oh my God, we have all of this. Like it's right here. Here's all this access to all this great information that will help you. And so sometimes we have so much information that it's hard to actually know what to give to the agency. And that's kind of where I came back to the point on coming in and doing a research project from the beginning or coming in and getting access to all those insights from the beginning. Because if you don't ask for it, then A, you might not know that it exists, or B, you might not be able to have visibility. And some of the best consultants or smaller agencies I've worked with are the ones that come in and say, here's how I work with you. I want to get access to your Slack. How do I join your marketing all hands? How do I get involved in really being a part of the team? And seeing those people out there and knowing that they exist, and that's the way that some companies can come in and work. It's really changed my perception of how we also are going to work with the agencies that we bring into the door. And I do think it makes a big delineation. So I would say, at least from our perspective, there's never a trying to keep an agency at an arm's length. But I think it's the hand in hand, like we want you to come in, but we also want you to ask to be engaged and come in and not force you because, you're coming from a different world and a different experience. And so if it's something you want to do and you're an agency, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to say, this is how we like to work. How do we get more embedded into the team? And if you're having a struggle with getting the team buy-in, like how do you work with your champion in the business to get more visibility into the work that you're doing? Because that thing can trickle down pretty quickly if you don't, build those relationships up front.
No, it's good advice. What do you think is something that agencies oftentimes get wrong? Or what is the one thing, if you could pick one thing that you wish more agencies, quote unquote, got?
Oh, that's a good question. I feel like we've talked about this one a little bit, but customer research is probably one of the biggest areas. I think a lot of agencies that I've worked with do not have the growth marketing experience. And if they don't have the growth marketing experience, the know-how to go in and really consume themselves in your research, whether it's, if you're a jobs to be done shop or personas or ICP, just really making sure that you're going beyond the table stakes into really understanding what's going to capture impact. It gets back to our first conversation around value, making sure you really understand that value from the beginning. And then I think to your point, it's almost this need to want to showcase those 10X results that sets you off in the wrong direction from the beginning, and that recognition of joint shared alignment on goals and coming back to what's realistic and what's not realistic. Because if an agency doesn't come in and, I've worked on that side, I totally know how it works sometimes when you get sold a project that you really can't fully deliver on, or you're in a situation where you're trying to keep up with it. Like that is a conversation you have to have from the beginning. That is something that you have to be talking about when it comes to what's in scope and what's not in scope in order to make sure that there's joint alignment on how you can achieve those goals. If you don't have that and you're saying, I'm going to come in 10X, and then you're not coming in 10Xing, then like your expectations from the beginning are misaligned.
You're giving me PTSD. One of my most challenging and last clients at my agency before COVID hit and before resigning from agency life. I think at one point said, if Danny brings up scope one more time, like we're done or something. And it was such an normally, if you bring it up every call, it's probably weird, but it was like such an egregious, there were like huge, massive things we'd like never even discussed that like, in our internal Slack, I would have like junior team members being like, what are they talking about? Like, did this get sold? I'm like, I've never heard of this project or this thing in my entire life.
Oh no.
And, bringing that up. So it's just funny to hear, about all of the scope creeps that occur.
The other side of that I would say, and this is actually speaking from the agency side, fire clients that aren't the right fit. Like that is something that I just recall so many agencies were talking about, continue to talk about. It goes both ways when, I'm saying this as the in-house leader, but also on the agency side, sometimes that partnership just isn't the right partnership and you're not going to get to alignment. And so don't be afraid to walk away from the clients that either A, aren't a good fit, or B, to your point, are keeping you at arm's length and not actually allowing you to get to the results that you know that you're capable of. It's really important that that partnership goes two ways.
I hear from a lot of agencies, if we fired all the clients we want to, we wouldn't have any clients left. So either they're working with all the wrong clients or no, I think it's a catch-22. Like in that particular scenario, we talked about it a ton. We would have, I think, had to lay off like 2 full-time employees potentially and stuff like that. So it has other ramifications.
Oh, that's tough.
I was their punching bag for a few months before COVID hitting. But no, I mean, good agencies, I agree with the firing. I think the best agencies I work with, one of their key traits is how selective they are on the front end before they're even a client. So no, I totally agree. A couple more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up with some fun ones. What are you most excited or bullish on in the marketing space in general at the moment? We've got artificial intelligence taking over the conversation. I think there's still a metaverse. In-person stuff is still back. What about you?
I would be a bad marketer if I didn't say AI. I feel like at this point right now, as you mentioned, it's taking over the conversation. And it's funny, I was on a different podcast last week.
Rival
podcast, not a rival podcast, just another one. And the question was similar but different. It's like, what are you so tired of hearing about? And so I'm almost speaking out of both ends right now, in that my answer to that one is the same answer to this one, which is AI. We cannot afford to not pay attention right now. We cannot be in a position to where we're not actually consuming and thinking about the impact that AI is going to have in marketing, in our businesses, in the industry as a whole. It's just the advancement of this technology over the last few weeks, even. It's just mind blowing. And so I think in general, it's probably the most important thing that we have to be paying attention to in order to make sure that we're continuing to stay innovative.
This may be the same answer as well. I was going to say, what keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint? Could be AI, I suppose.
No, I think AI actually, it's exciting. It's not keeping me up at night just yet. There was a whole doom and gloom in the beginning of, is AI taking over? And then, my mom is like, the robots are coming. I'm not that worried. Does your mom want to come on the
podcast and talk about AI? It sounds awesome.
She might. And I think, I was at a dinner last week with a bunch of CMOs, and we were talking about AI and sharing how other people were using it in their marketing. It's very exciting, I think, in a lot of ways, when you think about the opportunity that it can compound your ability to move faster and start to become more strategic. Like, no one's ever been able to say, I can focus on strategy, because they're so bogged down in execution. And now we're starting to see that shift. So that's not as much keeping me up at night. Honestly, what's keeping me up at night right now is just what's happening in the economy and seeing the number of layoffs happening across multiple other businesses. My empathy fires are going off in every direction. I mean, we've got positions open and we've never seen such incredible demand coming in for them from people that were either impacted by layoffs or worked at a company that was impacted by layoffs. And that just breaks my heart. So that's probably the area that keeps me up the most, is knowing the amount of incredible talent that's out there. And maybe there is that connection to AI and how that's going to impact the growth of marketers in the world and the opportunity to grow. And then personally, building a more diverse workforce for the future and starting to really, make sure that we're creating opportunities for diversity, equity, and inclusion and growing marketers in the space. There just isn't enough diversity. And so that's an area that, I want to see us continuing to grow in.
Well, I hope you get a good night's sleep most of the time, at least.
Thank you.
We'll finish with a couple fun ones here. What was your very first job growing up, or maybe after growing up?
Very first job, I was a barista when I was younger and in my early high school days. And so, fun fact, still make myself a cappuccino with fancy foam every morning.
Do you?
I do. It's my fun party trick.
Do you Instagram it every morning, I hope?
I don't know.
No. What's your preferred coffee method?
It's usually just a cappuccino with cashew milk or almond milk.
Okay. Do you think that job
cinnamon sprinkled on top?
Even better. Do you think that job prepared you in any way for what you do now?
No, not as much as my first job in college was being a door-to-door salesperson and managing a telemarketing agency. That job prepared me for where I am now.
Jamie, who I interviewed last week, her first job was door-to-door knocking as well. Maybe that's a trend of marketing leaders.
It might be.
Starting
I tell
as
you,
door-to-door salesmen. I don't know.
It's a hard career to have. You know, you deal with a lot of rejection and then, you know, there's apparently crazy turnover for CMOs. So door-to-door salesman, like it really gives you some thick skin.
Okay. What would your final meal be?
What would my final meal? I am a steak and potatoes person. So
what kind of steak?
Usually a nice ribeye.
I'm a ribeye enthusiast as well.
Yep.
And the final question, who is somebody who inspires you both personally or professionally?
Cheesy answer, but my mom. You know, I think
she's an AI expert apparently as well.
She's an AI expert. My parents, you know, both of them just really, they came from nothing and they built a career and showed us what hard work mixed with, you know, great parenting looks like, and kind of they were my motivators. My mom owns her own retail business. And so watching her kind of build that and grow that over the course of the years and then go through hardships when Big Brother started to take over for retail.
Shout out your mom's business. Where is it?
RJ Mars. It's in New Jersey.
Okay. Everybody go to RJ Mars. I don't know what they sell, but
it's like a little retail everything store.
I love it. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us. This was truly awesome. And I look forward to more LinkedIn posts from you in the future that I'll probably reach out about. And I hope you don't get a bunch of people offering customer research for $50,000 a pop. But thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel. This is great.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.